This is the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel. Today is Monday, the 10th of November. My name is Neil Saravandamutu. As always, I'm joined by Joanne Canello and John Willing. Hello to you both.
Good morning.
Hello.
So I got to ask, who's got their snow tires on?
We had ours done, and it's my husband did it. I have nothing to do with it.
You guys
So
both have your snow tires on? Well,
not
congratulations.
you, then, eh?
I got lucky. I had an appointment this past week, and not knowing it was going to snow, it's just like the winter gods, the snow tire gods were looking upon my house.
I
So
think
it
we
was
had to bring our
great.
car in for some other thing, and so we're like, oh, may as well get the snow tires on. And we're both thinking that's a bit early, so now we feel very smart.
Yeah,
Very
very
smug.
good. Well done.
Not you, though, Neil.
Well, I have an appointment for like Friday, so a week, a few days from now. So didn't quite make it, but oh well. But this
Close enough.
snow, as John and I were talking about before we started, I think this snow is going to melt in a couple of days. So
You
I'm
heard it
hoping
here
because we have not
first.
cleaned out our
Nation.
garage.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, big news at Ottawa City Council over the past, well, in fact, on Friday. We heard that council has gone ahead and voted to approve Lansdowne 2.0, and I think it's fair to say no big surprises there. But it really was quite an action-packed week in Lansdowne. I mean, a couple of days before that, we had the Auditor General's report. The Monday night, Joanne, you and I participated in a public forum in Barrhaven on Lansdowne.
All Lansdowne all the time. I heard from so many people who happened to see it on Rogers cable, like played over. I'm like, who is watching Rogers? Apparently, a number of people.
Well, more people than you'd think, right? Okay, so why don't we jump into it? And Joanne, maybe you can so the council vote on Friday, as I mentioned. Why don't you just tell us about it? I think people know the results, but why don't you just go and just give us a little bit color commentary on it?
I don't want to get too much into it because a lot of the issues that were discussed were like we've heard them over the week, right? A lot of the same questions from the 3-day finance committee meeting from the week before, although there were questions about the audit, and I know we're going to talk about the audit after this. But I just want to say that it was 6 hours long, this meeting. It started at 10:30. It ended at 4:30. I did the Peloton for an hour in between during that period because we were listening to it live because we had this foolish hope that we could actually do our podcast mid-afternoon Friday, fresh off the meeting. But it went so long that our other lives got in the way. And so I would say also that people were read the Riot Act because I thought the behavior was, generally speaking, like much better, more respectful after a very raucous audit committee earlier. And some tensions did run high, though. Sean Menard, he has been fighting this for a long time. And he has, like during the committee meeting, I think he asked almost every delegate a question, right? Yeah. And so he's been doing a lot of work. I think the amount of work he's done, the tiredness it showed. Marty Carr was quite incensed about it. Like she asked a lot of good questions. I thought she asked the best questions at audit. And in the end, even though she voted for the plan, she said it was the worst communication she's ever seen. It was a debacle. So there are people had some things to say for sure. I just want to say quickly who voted. The vote was 15-10. Just to say on the record, obviously Sean Menard voted against. Jeff Leeper, who actually gave in his closing remarks said he thinks there should be an arena, but this is not the deal. It should be a plan that is better for all the people of Ottawa. Jessica Bradley, Riley Brockington, who took the time to actually thank the staff who worked on the project, especially the planner, even though he voted against it, which I think we should talk about staff in a bit as well. Ariel Troster, Teresa Kavanaugh, Sean Devine, Ralston King, Lane Johnson, and Wilson Lowe, who kind of changed his vote. And maybe you guys remember this, but I don't think he said a single word during that meeting other than voting against it. Like, which is interesting because he took this sort of switcheroo stand. So,
although Joanne, he said nothing. You're absolutely right, but he did publish his thoughts, right? He did come out and say why. Yeah. So.
But he didn't say anything at this 6-hour meeting. And so I don't think that we actually were surprised by any of it. And I think people were happy to have it done by the weekend because it's been a lot of Lansdowne for the last few weeks.
Okay. Well, John, can I ask, did anything surprise you at this meeting?
Yeah, no, I think we knew where the vote was going to go. We could talk about Councillor Skalski, who talked about during her by-election campaign. She had skepticism about Lansdowne 2.0. And then she voted for it. We just talked about Councillor Lowe. We weren't quite sure what was going to happen. He voted against it. One thing I didn't expect to hear from some opponents was some questions about, hey, Lansdowne 1.0 could be years away from actually possibly turning a little bit of a financial corner for the city. So why don't we stick with Lansdowne 1.0, which has been, criticized so heavily, of course, in the past, and even to this day, we don't know really like what's in the future for if we were to just stick with 1.0, what was really going to happen based on what we've seen in the past. So I thought that was kind of a surprising tack by folks who didn't want to go through a 2.0, saying, you know what, your financial projections show in about 2032 that things are going to be actually looking pretty good. So they use that as an argument against it. I thought Councillor Brockington had some really good questions. I thought that I think over the years he asked really good questions actually at committee and council that are really direct. And I thought the PWHL issue coming to the forefront all of a sudden over the past couple of weeks it dominated, really. I think it dominated the meetings and dominated the conversation around Lansdowne. Yes, the financial part, but the PWHL was all of a sudden threw a bit of a curveball at council. It was percolating behind the scenes, but it didn't become public until a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. You know what? I thought it was weird. Like, sorry, John, but interrupting. Maybe you can comment. The way they were talking about how they were going to fix the PWHL's problems without them there. Yeah. It was like the mayor and the city and Roger Greenberg from OSEG are talking about, well, we've been talking to the Sens and the Capital Sports about what way they could do. I'm like, probably the PWHL could do that for themselves. I was thinking, I don't know. I found it odd.
Well, I thought that's what I was like. Well, I was thinking about Councillor Brockington. He asked this question to, I forget if it was to city staff and or OSEG, because they're talking about how can we make sure the charge stay in Ottawa? If this isn't going to be the arena that's big enough, what do we do? And then the question about LeBreton Flats and the Ottawa Senators came in, and I think it was Councillor Brockington who was asking, why would we facilitate an opportunity for the team to go and play at an arena that we have no control of, that's not part of our financial scheme to help make Lansdowne 2.0 work? Why would we encourage, the team to go play somewhere else? And the answer was, it's about for the bigger city building reason to keep the charge here. If that's what we have to do, then that's what we have to do. But I think one of the questions I wasn't quite sure was ever resolved is whether we need the charge at Lansdowne to make the financial scheme work, right? That revenue coming in off the tickets and everything else. So they would have to backfill those dates with other things happening at Lansdowne, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, John, that's a great point, right? And that how critical the charge would be to the financial success of Lansdowne. I think you're right that once the charge came out and said this deal is not viable for us, that was a bit of a game changer in terms of the discussion. That became the main issue. And that makes it made a lot of sense to me, quite frankly. I mean, on the one hand, you've got all the financials, which, a lot of people like us like to focus on, but that's very analytical and very sort of factual. Whereas the charge is just like, really became very emotional, right? It's here we've created something out of nothing that is become quite magical, right? And it's been so inspiring for, particularly, we often talk about, young women and girls that are being inspired to see these hockey players out there. And just the threat that Lansdowne 2.0 represents to the charge, whether, because obviously it's not in our control, and they, given what they've said about this being not viable, it really does represent a significant issue that we need to take into control. So yeah, I wasn't surprised to see that one really come to the forefront.
And the city's in a weird spot. I think it was Councillor Skelski who brought a motion to the table to the effect of, hey, we need to help the charge, right? And some councillors were scratching their head over this, like, what does this mean? What does this mean for the city? The city's in a weird spot because it's OSEG who's making the deal over the
and what does the city have to do with like getting involved in it? Like, I'm sure they would be helpful. I'm sure the city doesn't want to see the charge leave town, but that motion to me was just window dressing. I don't think how can that be a real thing? I don't understand.
For sure. But you couple that with the discussion that happened at Finance Committee, which kind of the mayor was leading about. So you're, where he's saying, okay, so you're like $1 million a year short, and then are you asking for a subsidy from the city? And that whole discussion I found really weird. Like, are we going to get in the business of subsidizing a professional sports team?
Yeah, and I thought I was thinking about you when I heard them double down again on the we shouldn't be helping a billionaire sports owner. I'm like, oh yeah, Neil will love that. The irony, everyone. Like, do we not? Well, like Roger Greenberg is sitting at the table. I mean, I don't. Although he's not as big a billionaire as perhaps the owner of the PWHL, but still, it was a very odd discussion, and also it's mixing a lot of things up, right? It's they're going to be $1 million short without the seating, but on the other hand, the PWHL is also worried that it's going to stop their growth, right? Because if they're on a momentum of growing, by the time the LeBreton Flats new NHL arena is not going to be built in that middle time. So
Right.
what happens? So
Okay.
yeah.
Can I just say one other interesting little exchange that I found really interesting, and it was between OSEG CEO Mark Gowdy and Sean Menard. It was Mark Gowdy came to the table and he took a run at Menard, saying, "Hey, we haven't really talked to the counselor for Lansdowne in like 2 years. I think he said 2023, if memory serves me correctly. And then
but yeah.
he criticized Councillor Menard for allegedly not reaching out to OSEG staff during the layoffs during COVID. And it was a really interesting, all of a sudden, like confrontation on the floor of council. Councillor Menard denied all these allegations from Mark Gowdy. All that to say is there's this relationship that's kind of important between OSEG, which oversees a lot of things at Lansdowne Park, and the city councillor. They don't get along. Obviously, we saw this in Lansdowne 1.0 too, when this deal was coming into the fore. So I thought that was a really interesting exchange, that there's still this kind of bad blood happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. Although, you know what? So John, I have engaged with OSEG as an advocate, okay, as a community advocate. And my experience has been that if you're aligned with them, they'll talk and be cooperative. As soon as you want to have an alternative perspective, it's, discussion over. So I'm not surprised. Like, I just don't see what there is for like a Councillor Menard to talk about with OSEG productively. And
quite frankly, there's nothing that OSEG needs from Councillor Menard.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a city. It's a city, big city project. And I don't know who needs who more. If Gowdy or if the OSEG needs Menard more, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Well, I would say actually that when I first signed on to a letter years ago looking for more transparency in this deal, this was like 2023. Kevin Page signed the letter or whatever. I think you're involved, Neil. And I used my company title just to show that I was not actually a reporter anymore, just for transparency. I was thinking, OSEG wrote a letter to my employers to say, we're very disappointed that your company is coming out against this. I would like to say that my employers at the time pushed back. They were like, I did not get in trouble, but I thought that was pretty heavy-handed. So when you say, how do you deal with OSEG? I don't know. But I'd like to hear both sides of that story.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Joanne, I want to move to what city staff have been saying about some of the elements of the proposal, because people like us and many others have been critical about different aspects of the proposal, things like the air rights. And I think you'd like to present the city view a little bit more and just sort of give that alternative perspective. So maybe,
and I'm not saying that I support these perspectives or believe them, but I just think, especially on Friday, I was thinking, I wish that city staff had explained it like this all along, because even though you might not believe it, there's a difference between you still think there's risk and you think that the city is incompetent or trying to pull one over on you, right? And so I just think we should just say, here's what they are actually saying and believing. So
well, let's go through those issues, and I'll turn to you first, Joanne, and John, if you want to jump in on any of them, do so, of course. Maybe we can start with air rights. So people like myself, we've been saying these air rights amount to a $1 million option to build in the future that Mirabella, the winner of the air rights, can walk away from at any time. Would you say that? How would you say the city is presenting this?
Yeah. So while that is true, right, it's $65 million. I would say that the city says they have done their due diligence. They've looked at the financial organizations that have dealt with Mirabella. And actually, I want to say the Auditor General also says that the risk of the developer not going through with the project is relatively low. She did not identify that as a huge risk. Of course, it is possible, but I'm just saying that it doesn't seem crazy. And I think one of the things is, people were talking about that $65 million as if like they were getting it day one. And when we realize that's not true, that brings up, cynicism. So I think they should have actually explained that. In fact, in the audit, Nathalie Goujon says that it's a bigger risk that the city's not like finished their part of the building on time, and would have to pay like $13 million to Mirabella. In fact, she says it's a lower risk that the development's not going to go ahead. So just to say they feel comfortable with that. It's not something they just made up out of the air.
Okay.
Speaking of air rights. Yes.
Okay. Well, let's turn to waterfall revenues. So people like myself have said that we're presented as if we're getting this $419 million deal for $130 million, which relies on these waterfall revenues coming through. Mm-hmm. I would say that a number of them are either there's skepticism as to whether they'll actually materialize, or they're money that we could just be spending on anything. They really should be just general resources. Yeah,
and so the waterfalls are different in that I don't think we can spend them on different resources, because I think it's part of the OSEG and the what is it called always? The closed financial waterfall system, whatever. It's ridiculous. But what I would say is it's actually this waterfall system. I'm not saying it's a great way to have a partnership, but it is actually better for the city than the first one because we get money sooner. There was a report in 2023 by EY looking at what revenues could be. The Auditor General says that she believes that the underlying assumptions EY made are sound, that the retail could produce this based on these assumptions. And I heard Isabel, like Jasmine, saying, she's one of the deputy treasurers. She's like, yeah, like there's a downside risk that we don't actually get as much revenue, but there's also a chance that we get more revenue. So again, I'm just saying they've thought this through. But I do think it's still valid criticism to say, 20 years, 30 years, you have no idea what retail is going to look like.
Yeah.
But so you know what? I do actually take exception with the fact they're always saying this will happen. And I know it's a small thing to say, we're forecasting this would happen. We expect this to happen. They don't. They just say, including in a huge memo that the city manager sent out the day before the vote, saying, this will cost $130 million to taxpayer. You don't know that, right? Yeah. But I just want to make the point that the city feels that they've done their due diligence. The people working on this project, Sean Moore, the planner, Isabel Jasmine, the treasurer, a lot of other people, Tammy Rose in infrastructure, Karina Duclos, person I have a lot of respect for. Like, they've been working really hard on the stuff that city council asked them to do, right? City council did not ask them to look at what would happen if we blew up the OSEG partnership, which maybe they should have asked them to do that. But you know what I mean? And so I just want to say, I just wanted to put these on the record just to say, like, the city staff, the project staff, they've worked hard and they believe that these are reasonable. That doesn't mean we have to agree with that, but they do, right? And it's not, and it's something I think they could have done a way better job of explaining, having a technical briefing, having somebody write a report, because, there's a difference, I think, Neil, between being skeptical about the plan or questioning whether it's going to work out, and also making it believe that people are pulling the wool over your eyes, right? And that's what they've made it look like.
Okay.
Sorry, I think I'm shaking.
But I'm going to say something about staff, and I agree that staff have done what they were asked to do, and but there were some exchanges over the last week where I thought staff were too partisan on this issue. Okay,
like Cyril Rogers. Oh, I had a lot of issues with him, and I think there's a difference between that. I think there's a difference, and I know this is super inside baseball, but that's what I am about. John, I don't know about you. You know some of these people. The people working on the project, I think, we're working diligently and hard and doing that, but Cyril, like Rogers, basically gave almost like a fist pump to the mayor at the end of the committee meeting. It's like, do you think this is great for taxpayers? Yes, I do. And I was like, that is super inappropriate. Inappropriate. And the exchange they had.
The managers know, like, who butters their bread. You know what I mean? Who pays their? It starts with the mayor. The buck stops with the mayor, and we've seen it with councils, for years. Like the management is doing the job that council wants them to do. To your guys' point, council charged them with this task of making this deal, nothing else. They didn't do find another option. So they all put their heads down and looked at how do we do this deal with OSEG, Lansdowne 2.0. And it's got to feel pretty good if you're staff to be able to get that vote confirming their analysis, essentially, because it took a long way to get there, years and years and years. And so it's got to be a win for staff, I think, too.
But you know what? No, I like for Cyril Rogers. I'm sorry. On the we were going to talk about the $17.4 million, right? That city is literally putting it aside every year to pay for the $330 million of debt we're taking in case we don't get this revenue back, right? When he was asked directly, now, granted, Sean Menard was getting pretty worked up at audit committee. I know we're going to talk about that, but he's asked, can this money go to something else? He kept not wanting to answer that question properly. I understand if you want to say, yes, we put it in this reserve fund, but to add context to that, if we don't use it on Lansdowne, then we'll have to spend more money on Lansdowne later. But he was really forceful in a way, actually, that I didn't think was appropriate. Like, the staff does actually answer to council. And at audit committee, the city manager, Wendy Stephenson, had to step in to say, yes, actually, you are right. That money can be spent here, but, and then gave some description. Like, it was not on the way he answered that question, I felt.
No. And, there's another question where I think it was Kathy Curry was asking about, is it indeed the fact that if we spend this money on Lansdowne, we'll actually have more money to spend on other assets throughout the city? And, there's also, through all sorts of convoluted logic, which I won't go into here, he confirmed
it was ridiculous.
That's absolutely the case.
Yeah, it was, I thought he was like way, way too partisan. I mean, I know it's their project and they are defending that work, but you have to actually show all of council respect, not just the people who are on your side.
And it's kind of like it's kind of like an understated skill if you're a manager at the city to be able to sit there at council and answer questions and be clear and communicative. Joanne, we've seen, and Neil, we've seen managers over the years who really aren't good at the mic. You know what I mean?
Marion Similak would never say anything like that.
Right. So they're disciplined. They're good at the mic. They're very focused in their communication. They're clear in their communication. They might be really good at what they do, but some just aren't good at the mic. And it's actually through this practice, that they get better. But
True.
But really, the communication.
I think that Isabel Jasmine is one of those people, and I think she didn't get the top job because I don't think she was as good at the mic, but I think she's getting better. I think it just takes her a while to get into it. But I don't think of her as giving partisan answers, where I have to say that I was surprised by Cyril Rogers' answers in the last couple of weeks. It's not something I've seen, not from Wendy Stephenson when she was the CFO, and certainly not from Marion Similak. She would never say anything like that.
Well, you know what? I would like to hear a few more yes/no replies to some of the questions that are asked to Isabel Jasmine.
I have to say, I agree with, I was mean to Kathy Curry last week, but I do agree it's not a court of law where people get to say yes, no. I mean, you should say yes and no, and still you can give some context. I don't think, you get to demand a one-word answer from people.
Okay, look, just a couple of other issues very quickly. So, Joanne, you touched on this idea of opportunity costs and the $17 million a year that taxpayers are paying. And there's that big debate about whether we could spend this money on other things. I actually want to come back to your response on the partnership revenues. Because what we have, I think we should be clear here that we have established that taxpayers will be paying $17 million a year. And so if there's zero partnership revenues, then that doesn't matter, right? Because we've got the funding strategy in place for how we're going to pay down this debt. And so the point that if those partnership revenues do materialize, and I believe there will be some amount of partnership revenues that will materialize, those effectively can be spent on anything. There's nothing.
It's just a choice the council's making to decide because they want to say it's going to only cost $5 million a year. So we are collecting that money. Amazingly, we can collect it without it increasing taxes. I still think it's amazing that we're making some 12-year-olds take the bus and pay a full adult fare, but somehow we can find this money without affecting taxes. This is the kind of stuff that makes people crazy. But I agree with that. I mean, I've never heard of opportunity costs so much in my life, but I think that was getting to be a convoluted thing. yeah, we have that money aside. I'm sure the city wants to do other things with it. And so if you bring the revenue in, either you can, whatever you offset, per year with the debt, what you're not spent, the 17.4 million we don't have to spend in a certain year. This is on average, of course. We should be able to do, other things with it. But of course you can. Of course you can do that. And the idea that you can't is not true, right? It's just, it's because they want to say it costs a third, that that our new stadium and arena will cost a third.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last sort of issue that people have been critical about is around construction timelines. Mm-hmm. I think people have argued that these look pretty aggressive and pretty, and as was pointed out a few minutes ago, certainly there can be financial penalties if we don't meet them with regards to the air rights. So how would staff respond to that?
I think they said that they looked at that closely. They gave themselves extra months. Although at one point, I think they said they gave themselves like an extra 3-month cushion. And I thought, 3 months doesn't seem that long. And again, just quickly to say, it's not like they didn't think of it. I wanted to say these things because I've been hearing stuff about staff, they just took OSIG's plan. They just did, and that's not true, right? They did actually do their own due diligence, and they believe they've given themselves enough cushion. Time will tell pretty quickly, actually. I think they're starting to dig up the great lawn for the arena shortly. Although I'm not sure with this weather how that's happening, but okay.
That throws everything off. Construction schedule is garbage now.
Yeah.
Well, that's the promise, right? That we're going to start constructing almost immediately. Mm-hmm. So we will see. John, I want to turn to you. And so over the last couple of weeks, there's been a large number of opinion pieces come out. I think it's fair to say, at least the ones that I've seen, they've been disproportionately against the proposal. In fact, I've seen, other than Randall Denley, I can't actually think of any opinion pieces that I've seen out there that were pro Lansdowne 2.0.
I've not run into anyone who's enthusiastically in favor of it, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. So, John, the question I have for you is objectively, if we look at this, is this a strong proposal? Is it a weak proposal? Are all these critics, where most of the critics are pointing, is that a fair assessment or not?
I think, I don't know about objectively, but certainly there's a lot of skepticism. And you know what? I did go through the columns also, just in the Citizen, because that's where typically opinion pieces run in the mainstream media in the city. So you had the city columnist Bruce Deachman against. Randall Denley was for. I think it was Mohammed Adam who writes, who's has a lot of history writing about municipal politics in the city, was skeptical. And then on the other side, we had Roger Greenberg writing in for. We had but then on the PWHL actually had an opinion piece too that was skeptical, as we know. We had Tone Dreesen, who's obviously a critic about process, who's skeptical. So to your point, Neil, I think the pendulum kind of in the public domain, in the public sphere, in the public conversation, it's over on the highly skeptical and opposed side.
I just want to point out on Bruce.
Let's let John finish there, Joanne.
No. He's a friend, but Bruce Deachman changed his mind, right? Yes. That was interesting. A year ago, he was in favor. Now, no.
And I don't want to analyze the journalism happening out there, but you saw that his thinking change over time too through his columns that brought him to his column that was before the vote too that was very super skeptical and against. But I think the for Lansdowne 2.0 side really needed. As it turns out, they didn't need it really, but that was missing from the for side. Some organizations or people that really speaking out in favor. We heard from business organizations and the tourism, obviously talking about how good Lansdowne 2.0. But on the against side, you hear really the grassroots groups speaking up, against it. You don't get that on the for side so much. But to your question, Neil, I think the conversation certainly on Substacks and Reddit, and we see it a bit in the mainstream media, has definitely sided on the skeptical / opposing view.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, Joanne, let me kind of ask you the same question in that if we look at this objectively, do you think this was a good deal or not?
I don't know. I would have had a hard time voting on that. I think in the end, I would have voted against it because I think there is too many question marks around it. And the problem is the time to have voted on it is maybe 2021 or at the very least 2023, right? And this is something we never learn. Like we started going down a path on like, oh, let's work on the city and OSEG coming back with us. This is in 2021 on a deal to what that might look like. Everybody agreed in 2021, like on that. And you forget, and it's hard to stop at that moment to say, wait, are we going on a path that we can't get off? And I remember Jim Watson saying, we're not, we're not committing ourselves to anything, right? So yeah, I don't think it's a great deal. And because in particular, it seems to be the only deal, right? Like at some point we should have other options. Like we kind of sole sourced this the first time and now we're sole sourcing it the second time around again. So no, I don't think it's ideal, but I can see why some people want it. And I think that's where you're going with this.
Well, okay, we're going to come to that in just a sec. But look, I'm going to say, and this will not come as any surprise, I think objectively, I think it's a terrible deal. Terrible deal for taxpayers. What was interesting at that public forum in Barrhaven that you and I went to, Joanne, one of the speakers was Alexandra Gruca-Macaulay, who actually was able to dig up the return on investment under Lansdowne 1.0 was actually worked out to be quite good for the city, like maybe in the 4% range, whereas very weak for OSEG in the sort of 1% range. And that's, there's a lot of what seems to be what's driving this proposal comes down to that this wasn't a good enough, it hasn't turned out to be a good enough deal for OSEG. So I think objectively this is not a good deal for taxpayers. And it's to the point that Councillor Menard has been making over the last few days that and what's his line? The more you know about Lansdowne, the more it's a no. and I'll tell you something. I don't think we have heard the end of it yet. There's this was a very short process to analyze the proposal. We are going to spend there's going to be people still continuing to dig into this proposal, and I think we're going to find out more and more of the weaknesses in it. But I mean, it's a done deal. So let's come to that question, and I'll let either of you jump in, whoever wants to take this question first. But why on earth did we agree to this?
I think there's a lot of reasons. There can be a lot of reasons. I don't know everybody's motivation, but like there'll be some people who believe in it, right? They want a new arena. They want some new stadium. There are people on council who are like, oh, is this what staff's recommending and the mayor's office is telling us we should support it? We will do that because my residents, maybe that's not a big issue for them. Maybe they're on the fence, right? They're not sure what to do. And I have found this before when there's technical stuff on the floor, some councillors are really afraid to like jump into it. Like the number of times when I was covering LRT that people are said, well, we're not engineers. I'm like, well, learn some engineering. Like, sure. Understand the issue and try to make a decision. I think they're really afraid that like if, for example, say, sure, it's going to, the deal would be better for the city, Lansdowne 1.0 in a few years. But it would not be enough to make OSEG whole of all the money they lost. And so if OSEG just kind of went, okay, well, we're done here. Like Roger Greenberg is pretty much keeping this thing going on his own. And just like, I'm walking away now, like there's going to be councillors who do not want to wear that. They don't want to be responsible for that. And also they do not want to make this an election issue. Like it will be done this year and next year there'll be some construction happening, but it won't be down the road enough to know whether it's going well or not. Right. So they're like, please put this behind us. I don't want to talk about it next year. So these are some of the reasons I think that people have, they're not good reasons, most of them, but that there's some. John, what do you think?
I think like there's a sense of, and we hear this from sometimes Mayor Sutcliffe, we certainly heard it from former Mayor Watson, that they don't want to be a waffling council. They don't want to drag their feet, right? And I think that that narrative kind of permeates through council, that they want to be a doer and not a waiter or putter-offer council. And so there's a sense that they want to get something done. And this is huge, obviously, a major municipal project that they just want to get done. Also, I think for 2.0, like the path was set with 1.0. And we talked a few minutes ago about there was no other options. And I think if you're a council member, like how do you not feel hemmed in by 2.0? Like what else? There's nothing else on the table in front of them. There's no other option. So what do? We just kind of, and maybe some of them like hold their nose and say yes. and continue on to the next huge issue, which we're going to talk about probably on the next pod, is the municipal budget. And so we're going to have two back-to-back issues. You could tell at the end of the Lansdowne conversation, we saw it in the past too. You're exhausted. They're exhausted at the end. Let's move on to the next big thing we have to worry about. And so you see that exhaustion creep in with many city decisions. Lansdowne's happened, many times now over the past 10 plus years. But I think there's also a sense of they just want to make sure they're projecting to the public that they're doing something at council, whether it comes to fruition or not. But, hopes and dreams. And I think that's what the vote has to do with.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys my take. And Joanne, you're not going to like this. I'm going to tell you that right now.
I know already. I'm not going to. Go ahead. It's your pod.
I think we have to be realistic about the way the city operates, and that there are a handful of powerful people that have an undue influence over the priorities that this city pursues. Now, priorities are defined, in my opinion, through the budget, right? I mean, we can talk whatever we want about different priorities, but unless we put money behind it, it's not really a priority. Now, with the municipal budget, as we're about to see later this week, it's going to be released, and it is going to look exactly like last year's budget, with a little increment of, a little increment for every department for inflation. And there might be a few things sprinkled on top that are fairly, that are statistically minor in the grand scheme of things. So the question becomes, as a city, with any discretionary money that you have or that you choose to allocate, where do you put it? And you're actually right, Joanne, that when Cyril Rogers says, "Oh, I can find this money elsewhere in the budget," what he can do is he can increase bus fares on kids so that he can support the Lansdowne proposal, right? I mean, that's essentially.
I think he'd have a lot to say about that particular criticism and how to move that around. But okay, but yes, I get what you mean. Somehow we can find money for this, but not for other things.
Exactly, and it's just that, like I say, I think that there are people in this city that have undue influence over the priority setting exercise, and that's what's happened here in Lansdowne. If I think about Mayor Sutcliffe, he has backed away from conflict in the past. You look at something like Sprung Structures, when that became particularly contentious, he just said, okay, well, I don't know. I don't know whose decision it was to back away from that, but there's no doubt that there's no doubt that there would have been some discussion at the political level that we have to stop doing this. And during the closing remarks, I can't remember which councillor it was, but one said, you hope with a major city building project like this, we would have consensus around the council table rather than being a highly divided council. And I think that's a fair assessment here. And yet the fact that, that he and others were willing to charge through and push this through regardless, really, speaks to my point about who's setting priorities. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair. Certainly Roger Greenberg is, fairly powerful person in this town. I know that people talk about developers, but I was like, well, there's only one really involved in this. But it's been a long haul on this Lansdowne file.
Okay.
And I think okay.
So I just last point I wanted to bring up that came up a minute ago was, Joanne, you talked about elections and that it's interesting that at our public forum on Monday, one of the questions that came up was, how come this was never an election issue previously, like in 2026? And essentially the response was, well, let's make it an election issue it wasn't an election issue in 2022. Let's make it one for 2026. Both of you, do you think that's realistic that this will become an election issue? No.
And I said that, I think, at the forum, right? In 2022, because it was 2021, we're just looking into what the new plan might be. And I would just like to say that Mark Sutcliffe on the record said, I absolutely am in favor of it. So it was never a surprise. He was always in favor of going ahead with the whatever revitalization at Lansdowne is. So he's never really changed his position on that. What I was saying, people wanted to put this behind them. The vote is done. Maybe in the Glebe, in Capital Ward, that's an issue, but their councillor already voted against it. So there's nothing much else to do there. And if there are going to be issues in the development or the financing or the construction, they're not going to actually be we're not going to see them before next October, right? So I think it's hard to make things into an election issue that aren't happening right now this minute. So
yeah,
I mean, even the LRT, you couldn't even make the LRT an election issue in 2022, and it was a friggin' debacle.
things have to be
Yeah.
go completely awry over the next year on Lansdowne, and that's very short runway for it to pop up in the thoughts of the municipal voter. So no, it's your question, Neil. I can't imagine it's going to be an election issue, but stranger things have happened, so we'll see.
Well, you know what? You're right. If we look at it on a historical basis, LRT, how that never became an election issue. Even the convoy management, that never became an election issue
Well, I
either.
guess a lot of the people who were in charge at the time were not running, so that might be
Yeah.
one of the reasons, right? Yeah.
Well, I would like to say I wouldn't write it off so quickly. I
Do
think
you have any
I'll tell you-
insight into someone who might want to make an
Yeah,
election?
well, no. Look, I mean,
Wondering.
look, I'm a community advocate. I'm not shy about the fact that I will try to make this into an election issue to the best of my capabilities. But I think what we saw was the breadth of anger in the community around this deal was really quite surprising, and it was. I can understand why council tried to rush it through so quickly, because the longer it sat out there, the more people heard about it, the more they disliked it. You look at, so Councillor Brockington made a comment. He said over the last number of months, I've had, I think the numbers where he said I got 1,400 letters on Lansdowne, and 1,000 of them were opposed to it. Okay, so that sounds, like 1,000 of 1,400. That sounds kind of like a reasonable, reasonable proxy for other parts of the city. And yeah, it's just people didn't. As soon as people found out about it, they say, "Yeah, no, I don't want to do this." And so whether community activists like myself can carry that through to the next election is kind of to be determined.
It's going to really be up to candidates if they want to make an election issue and what their tact is, what their strategy is. So if you're a candidate taking on an incumbent and you're not happy with his or her vote on Lansdowne, maybe it was in favor and you want to take that on, like how much of a stink can those candidates make?
Well, like
right,
what will
during the
happen in
campaign?
Osgood, like in Osgood ward, where, and I've never spoken to Councillor Skulski about this, but during a debate there, which I think we discussed at the time, she said, well, I want to know more about Lansdowne, but I could think of a better way of spending $300 million, right? And because that by-election was so recent, is somebody going to like bring that up? And will that matter in Osgood ward? I don't know. But
Okay.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Okay, so can we turn to the audit committee meeting?
That
for
was
a minute?
so fun. Oh my God, what a
was.
cool meeting.
It was on entertainment value.
It was very old school. Like, I don't know what you thought, John. It was like watching some of those old Watson days.
Yeah, well, let's get like I don't want to take the question out of your mouth here, Neil, but let's get right. Can we get right to like the drama?
Let's do it. Let's go right to the drama.
So I have a number of things to say after, but yes.
The high level is, Councillor Menard accused Councillor Tierney of swearing at him during some questioning around the table, which is interesting and made me think back to those two.
Say the word. Even CBC ran it. Say what he said he called him.
Did he say he called him an asshole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
CBC even ran it on the air. It was really something.
So
and
CBC
Kathy Curry's like, who's the chair? She's like, whoa, watch what you're saying into the mic. It was it was very tense.
It made me reflect on all those years of debates around council, acrimonious debates around council, dramatic, where tempers come to a head. And, and I don't know if there's any love lost between Councillor Menard and Councillor Tierney. I remember, when Councillor Tierney was appointed transportation chair in the previous council, Councillor Menard was really critical about that decision by, at the time, what everyone called the Watson Club. Councillor Leeper was aiming to be transportation chair, and I think Councillor Menard spoke up about it on social media. That's just one example, but I think that relationship, I don't think there's any love lost possibly between the two, and we saw it play out in public on the floor.
Tierney was being a jerk. I'm sorry. Like, that's not, yes, Sean was asking a lot of questions, and he was getting very frustrated with staff, which I understand, but also you can't really badger staff that much. And I do wonder if the chair should have stepped in at some point. But you can see Tim Tierney, like, looking at his lips are moving, like you can't hear him because of the mic, but he's clearly saying something like, you've asked 2 times now, and then going on. And also I hear from other councillors that Tim Tierney is very disruptive and just like out of control. So like that meeting was shocking. It was shocking. He was one of the people.
Yeah.
He spoke very little at council, although when he did talk, he spoke sarcastically, which is really not helpful either.
Yeah.
But that audit committee was like, I haven't seen anything like that in some time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you made the point that they seem to be on better behavior at committee a few days
Council.
later.
Yeah.
You think they had a talking to?
Yes.
Well,
Yes, I do.
the mayor said right at the beginning of council meeting, "Hey guys, like tempers have been heating on this. Like, let's try to have a professional." He did like I'm paraphrasing here. Let's try to have a professional meeting, be professional around the table. And I don't know if like councilor heeded his words, but we did see a pretty professional discussion around the council table before the vote.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the question is this the new tone for council, or is this, water under the bridge now? And in all fairness on Lansdowne, and ultimately I think it's up to the mayor, right, to decide what sort of tone he is going to enforce around that council table. He did set the tone on Lansdowne from the very set, with his press release, right, going out and attacking people and saying if you're not, basically saying, it's if you oppose me, then you're wrong, right? And so, yeah, I wonder if this will change or if this is the new way. I guess we'll find out.
It's hard
Yeah.
to keep a rein on like 24 politicians around a nonpartisan, like I mean partisan forum, right? So like everyone is
Especially
their own
election
boss.
year. Yeah, and as the election looms closer, people get riled up and
For sure.
They're all worried about all kinds of things that maybe are valid and maybe are not.
And that's a really good point, Joanne. And leading up to the next election, now it's all about like if you're running a campaign about content, right? What can I say that's interesting around the council table that can be captured by video cameras that I can use in the future? I mean, it's crazy to think about, but it's campaigning in the year 2025, 2026.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Jeff Leaper's speech was, like his Lansdowne speech was, right? That's a campaign speech for sure.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We have talked a lot about Lansdowne over the last couple of weeks. A lot. Any last words that either of you want to say?
I want to say something out of the audit that I thought was shocking.
Okay.
So like I gave staff kudos, but I just want to give them their due as to what work they did. But one of the things I had never heard before, and came up once at council, which I thought, wow, this should get more attention. And that is the Auditor General looked at the revenue being projected for the Red Blacks that seems to be made up. And so they're looking at the short term and long term. So short term in the next couple of years. Apparently, the Red Blacks revenue is going to be about 9% growth in the next few years. Yeah, except the last couple of years has been barely 5%. So where is that extra coming from? Same thing on the costs. Operating costs are going to go up only 2% over the next couple of years. They have been higher than that in the past. There is no evidence to show that these numbers are reasonable, or why they would be, why revenues growth would be so much more, and operating costs are increasing by not very much, less than the rate of inflation, in fact. And like, if those are off, like the projections could be off, like literally tens of millions of dollars over the long term of it. So I thought that got a short shrift. So even though, I was talking about how staff was, did their work on the plan, I think there's a lot to be skeptical of. And I thought, why is this only coming out now? Like, why did we not see these projections before? And I thought that was alarming.
Yeah, and I would say just quickly, like I hope the Red Blacks do well. I hope this, even larger than that, the CFL like is on a path to some kind of sustainable future too. I'm not saying that they're going to disappear; they've been around forever, right? But I know that that's always a question with the league. But as the Auditor General pointed out too, this is a major long-term deal the city has inked with OSAG, 50 years now, right? 2075, and they're in it for the long haul, and that was a risk pointed out by the AG as well. So. So many risks. We talk about it on the pod, like how many risks are involved in this deal, guys. Holy cow. But
I don't think anyone is comfortable with this deal. I'm not even sure people who voted for it are comfortable with it. Like, I'm very uncomfortable with it. I get that it was hard. And I'm generally against it, not as against as you, Neil. I can sort of see the other side, but I think we're taking a lot of risks.
Well, you know what? It goes to Ariel Trosser's point, and that's the best predictor of future success is past performance. And past performance has always underperformed. In fact, significantly underperformed, and that's and yet we are jumping into this rosy projection and assuming that's going to carry us. So yeah, I think that's probably for me the elephant in the room. And actually, I guess the one risk that the Auditor General also flagged was around contingency and cost overruns, and that's something that we always talk about $419 million just being a fixed price. And Joanne, you've explained how fixed price is anything, well, is not what people think it is.
No, it is not. Yeah.
And so I guess the question is, when are we, we've got a 10% project contingency budget right now that will at some point get, well, may at some point get used up. And at what point is there a return to council to say, oh, you know what, we've actually gone beyond that contingency budget and now we need more money. So I'm not sure, I haven't quite figured out the timing of when that is most likely to happen, but I suspect that's something we can expect in, sort of 2026, 2027.
Before we move off Lansdowne, I want to give kudos to you, Neil, and Better Ottawa for making this into really a citywide conversation. I mean, I was a little bit worried about going into last Monday's forum because I'm like, oh, it's going to be people super mad. And some people were not, like, there weren't a lot of supporters in that room. But I really felt people wanted to talk about it. They wanted to express things. They want to ask questions. And I think that what you've been doing has given people a lot of time, information, and presented information in a different way than they were getting it from the city, and given them an opportunity, though, to have their voices heard. And I think good for you, because this is something that would have been a City Hall thing, and it really has become a citywide discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks very much. And I have to say that, that Barrhaven forum that we did on Monday, it was great.
Only last Monday? Wow, it's been a long week.
I know. It seems a lifetime ago. But I was actually, we were never quite sure about how many people would just jump in a car from, let's say, Centertown and come out just to be there, versus people that are local that showed up. It turned out quite a lot of people in the room were local, which was fantastic to see. And I must admit that the one regret that I have is that we didn't do this earlier so that we could do more of these around the city, in Orleans, in Riverside South, you name it, right? Like parts of the parts of the city that just haven't felt that they are part of this Lansdowne debate up until now. So in any case, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Great work.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we close the book on Lansdowne for now?
Oh,
thank God.
Please.
Okay,
please.
let's do it. Hey,
So
listen,
happy.
I've got one quick question in almost like a lightning round here. And that's because we have to talk about something other than Lansdowne. So let's turn to what I thought was quite a significant legal case involving the Police Services Board. And the decision came down, this was in a small claims court, that the Police Services Board was violating critics' freedom of expression. And basically, the police board has been highly restrictive of who gets to speak and what they can say, in terms of vetting delegations in advance. So first of all, John, does that ruling surprise you that around freedom of expression?
Well, I had to double check because small claims. Oh my God, how did it end up in small claims court? But I guess the amount of the lawsuit, of course, that justified it to be in small claims. The ruling surprised me kind of a little bit, but I always think courts always are let kind of elected bodies make these decisions for their own bylaws and their own rules, but not this judge. This judge, ruled that the Police Services Board violated the charter by restricting the speakers who are critical of the police force. And it's actually what an interesting move the Police Services Board made back in 2023 to do this, requiring advance notice from speakers, and they want to see their remarks beforehand too. And so what happened was, Robin Brown of 613-819 Black Hub, and Jeffrey Bradley, who was a PhD candidate at the time. I don't know if he still is right now, but they challenged this decision by the Police Services Board, and they won. So good on them. I don't know what kind of rules changes the police board is going to make now, but it just shows that if you're going to allow speakers, if you're the police board especially, you can't put unfair handcuffs on them in their deputations.
You can't ask people to give their comments ahead of time so they're vetted. That is ridiculous.
Yeah, like how did this? I mean, I was kind of surprised, Joanne, that this was even allowed in the first place. And
yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Like I was going to say, like, why is the Police Services Board different than any other committee, right? Like a committee, they'll have their delegations, and even if they are critical and they disagree with it, the chair will sit there and smile and say, "Thank you for your delegation."
Yeah. I think actually, so what happened is, how do I say it? I don't know everything about this. I would say they had a different chair then, right? And those, I think even before this court case came out, that the decision came out, that procedure had been changed. I think it was the people in charge at the time, who was an outside person, Gail Beck, I believe it was like, I think there are some people who don't really get what it's going to be like, right? So the police board is a little bit different. When you have a delegation, if you go to a regular committee, I'm going to back up, council committee, you have to talk to the item. And if you're going off on another tangent, they tell you you're out of order and you can't talk about that. I do not think that is the case with police board. I think you can come and talk about whatever you want at the police board, right? And so sometimes in times where it's been big issues are happening in the city, there's a lot of delegations. It goes a long time. Sometimes it gets contentious. People get upset. And instead of figuring out a way to deal with that, sometimes you do need security, to be honest, at some of these board meetings, or just, with a clerk's office, some way to figure out how to make these meetings more reasonable. They did. They had two things. One is, for a while they were only online. They refused to have them in person, which is, again, ridiculous. And also the pre-vetting of the questions. At some point, there was even a proposal that the questions and the delegation would be before the actual meeting. Like, these are all insane, right? So I know there have been people over the years have pushed back on that. I remember watching Marty Carr say she was not in favor of that. So, I think there are people who don't get what democracy is like sometimes, and it's ugly sometimes, and it's, certainly inconvenient, right? Like, and I've heard this even from reporters. They're like, we've got to deal with this public delegation. We can't just have hours and hours or days of public delegations. To which I always say, suck it up. Like, that's not, no, like, it's the base. This is the bare minimum we have in democracy, where you get to come and speak to decision makers. So it was really shocking that they had done that. And I'm glad that the court ruled against it. And I think that, I don't speak for Robin Brown. I know him. I haven't talked to him about this, but I think that their organization has a better relationship with the board these days. I don't know if you guys know him. Yeah.
That's what it's kind of like in the reporting I've seen too. So that's good to hear.
Okay. Listen, that's it for this week. We have budget coming out on the city budget coming out on Wednesday, and we'll see a first draft of the entire budget, which I'm sure will be remarkably close to the final budget, but that's another issue.
It always is.
So I think it's fair to say the three of us will be back at the end of this week to talk about that and our initial impressions of that budget. Until then, I want to say thanks to you, Joanne, and you, John, for your thoughts today. I would like to thank all of our listeners for joining us, and we will look forward to reconnecting at the end of the week. Until then, this has been the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel.